It happened outside St. Mark's Church in rural Ohio on the night of November 3rd. A college student named Alex Ward, angry at God after losing his sister, climbed the old crucifix behind the chapel with a can of spray paint in his hand. He covered the face of Jesus in black paint and laughed. Then the air changed and the wind stopped. The statue began to glow from within, like stone turning to fire. Dozens saw it through their windows, some falling to their knees, others reaching for their phones that suddenly went dark. What happened next would silence everyone who thought it was just a prank. Before I tell you the story, please write in the comments below me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And if stories like this move you, like and subscribe to our channel to stay close. All right, let's go back to the moment it happened. It was Friday, October 13th, 2023, in the quiet town of Fairview, Ohio, where the streets emptied early and the streetlights hummed like tired machines. The air had that late autumn chill that made breath visible, and the smell of burned leaves hung low over the cul-de-sac where Alex Ward lived with his parents. He was 20 years old, a community college dropout who worked 3 days a week at the hardware store on Main, and spent his nights skating behind the grocery warehouse, earbuds in, hood up, avoiding the silence of home. His mother spoke softly these days, his father hardly at all. There were still framed photos of his sister Emily on the wall near the stairs, one with her wearing a silver cross and squinting into sunlight. She had died 3 years earlier in a car accident on a rain-soaked highway, and Alex still remembered the way his father couldn't look at him for weeks afterward, as if grief had assigned blame. The faith that once held their family together dissolved quietly, replaced by small routines, muted dinners, and the constant flicker of a television left on for noise. But what happens when you mock the divine? That question wouldn't come in words at first. It would start with a dare, a joke, a laugh in the wrong place at the wrong time. That evening, Alex met his friends Dylan, Marcus, and Leo behind the diner near the edge of town, where the dumpsters sat in shadow and the air smelled faintly of fryer oil. They passed a cheap bottle back and forth and argued over a meme one of them had posted about religion being the longest-running scam. Dylan scrolled through his phone, reading aloud the comments with a laugh, then said, "You know that big Jesus statue behind St. Mark's? The one facing the cemetery? We should fix his face up a little, make him smile." The others laughed. Alex did too, though it came out forced. Leo pointed at the backpack by Alex's feet. "You've got your paint, right? Come on, artist boy. Let's see what you can do." Alex hesitated, looking down at his scuffed shoes. He didn't want to say no, not in front of them. They expected him to prove that all the stuff he posted online wasn't just talk, that he'd stopped caring about the church that once made him kneel in silence while everyone prayed for a God who hadn't saved Emily. He took another sip and shrugged. "Fine, one masterpiece for the night." By midnight, the churchyard was silent except for the crickets. He pushed his skateboard through the gate, the wheels crunching gravel. A motion light flicked on above the side door, casting the crucifix in half shadow. It stood about 8 feet tall, carved stone with weather stains on the arms and a faint crack through the shoulder. The face was serene, the eyes closed, the mouth soft, that expression of peace that made Alex's chest tighten with something close to anger. He pulled the spray can from his bag and shook it, the metallic rattle loud in the empty air. He started low, spraying myth across the concrete base in thick black lines. The sound was harsh and rhythmic, like gas escaping. He added fake hope above it. The smell of paint hung heavy. Then he looked up again. The stillness of the face annoyed him. It reminded him of how the pastor had spoken at Emily's funeral, telling everyone she was in a better place. He had wanted to shout back that her place should have been here. "You want a better place?" he muttered. "I'll give you one." He raised the can and painted directly on the statue's face. 2 large, uneven circles over the eyes, a crooked smile stretched across the mouth, the black paint glistening wet under the weak light. The hiss stopped, leaving only his heartbeat and the faint electric buzz from the church sign. He stepped back and stared. The face, now distorted, looked almost alive, the grin strange and wrong, the eyes darker than before. For a second, he thought he saw movement in the reflection of the paint, like a shadow crossing behind it, but when he turned, nothing was there. He laughed once, quietly, the sound too thin in the cold air. Pulling out his phone, he switched on the flash and took a photo. The light hit the painted surface, bright white, and in that instant he saw something that made him freeze. From the corner of the left eye, just where the new paint met the old stone, a single line of black began to run downward, slow and steady, following the curve of the cheek like a tear. It didn't drip or splatter like paint should. It moved cleanly, as if the statue itself was weeping. He swallowed, staring, waiting for it to stop. It didn't. The wind pressed cold against his neck. Somewhere behind him, a metal gate creaked. He blinked hard and forced himself to laugh again. "Gravity," he said under his breath. "That's all?" But his voice trembled slightly. He took another photo anyway, the flash bleaching everything pale, then looked at the image on his screen. The tear was there, perfect, centered in the light. He almost deleted it. Instead, he uploaded it with the caption, "Modern Art. God 2.0. The phone screen glowed against his face as he stepped back. The smell of paint mixed with damp grass. He zipped the can into his bag, pushed off on his skateboard, and rolled out through the open gate. Behind him, the statue loomed against the night sky, streaked with rain clouds, that black drop still glinting faintly under the streetlight. Alex didn't look back. He rode fast, his wheels rattling over the cracks in the road, the sound fading until the town was silent again. The only movement a slow ripple of water running down stone. A dark tear no one would see until morning. And by sunrise, the picture he posted would already be spreading, pixel by pixel, across every screen that cared to look. By the time the sun rose the next morning, the photo had already spread across Fairview like spilled ink. Screens lit up in kitchens, classrooms, and waiting rooms. Whispers started before breakfast was over. At St. Mark's, the custodian found the statue first, paint dripping down the face, the words "Myth and Fake Hope" scrawled across the base. He called the pastor, who called the police, who called the local news. By mid-afternoon, Alex's name was circulating online, matched to the grainy frame from a security camera that caught him skating away. His phone buzzed constantly with notifications, likes from atheist groups, angry comments from locals, a few messages from friends that began with "Bro, you're famous" and ended with "You're screwed." He didn't leave his room until his father knocked once, handed him the folded newspaper without a word, and walked away down the hall. But what had begun as a joke was already moving towards something far larger than him. The article headline was plain: "Vandalism at St. Mark's stirs outrage." Below it, a photo showed the painted crucifix, the black grin bright against pale stone. Alex stared at it, remembering that single line of paint sliding down the cheek like a tear. He rubbed his eyes and muttered that it had to be lighting, maybe condensation. Yet even as he said it, he felt that same coldness in his chest as he had that night, like being watched. 2 days later, the college dean called him in. His suspension was brief but humiliating. They cited defacement of religious property and conduct damaging to the community. His friends kept their distance after that. Dylan stopped answering messages. Leo texted once, "No hard feelings, but my dad's furious, man," and disappeared. Alone, Alex avoided his parents, sleeping through the day and walking at night. He couldn't shake the sound of spray paint hissing or the way his hand had trembled when the paint had run. The court hearing was short. His sentence, 200 hours of community service under the supervision of the church's outreach center. He almost laughed at the irony. On his first day, he arrived in a worn gray hoodie, headphones around his neck, ready to keep quiet and get it over with. The outreach center occupied a converted house beside the church, its paint peeling, its porch cluttered with boxes of donated clothes. Inside, an older man sorted papers behind a folding table. "You must be Alex," he said, voice soft but steady. "I'm Elias. I'll be signing your hours." Alex nodded without meeting his eyes. Elias was in his 70s, white hair neatly combed back, sweater buttoned to the collar. His movements were slow, deliberate, as if he measured time differently. He handed Alex a clipboard. "We start simple, cleaning up the graffiti on the east wall. Then we'll move to the park benches." They walked together across the churchyard. The autumn wind rattled leaves against the fence. When they reached the wall, Alex noticed the crucifix in the distance, still cordoned off with police tape, half cleaned. For a moment, he thought he saw a faint black streak still on the cheek, like residue that refused to fade. He looked away quickly and began scrubbing the wall, the rough sound of the brush filling the silence. Elias worked beside him without speaking for a long while. Then he said quietly, "It's strange how anger finds us. Sometimes we think we've left it behind, but it hides until something holy reminds us what we've lost." Alex glanced up, half irritated. "You think I did this because of anger?" Elias met his gaze. "I think you wouldn't be here if you weren't hurting." Alex scoffed, dipped the sponge in the bucket and said, "I'm just cleaning paint, Father, not confessing." Elias smiled faintly. "Then clean well. Maybe truth hides under paint too." They worked in silence again. That night, Alex lay in bed unable to sleep. The wind outside whistled against the window frame, low and constant. He closed his eyes but heard faint sounds, whispers, maybe his own imagination, something like a voice saying, "Why?" He turned on the lamp, heart pounding, and told himself it was guilt, nothing more. But when he tried to sleep again, he dreamt of the statue's eyes opening slowly in the dark. The following week brought colder air and longer hours. His job was to repaint fences, wash graffiti off bus stops, and pick up trash near the riverbank. It was dull, repetitive work. Yet every day, Father Elias was there, never lecturing, never prying. He told small stories instead. About growing up on a farm outside Toledo, about fixing broken pews with his father, about losing his wife to illness long ago, and still believing God had not abandoned him. The stories had no agenda, no warning, just quiet fragments of a man who had lived through too much to waste time judging others. During a break one afternoon, Alex leaned against the fence, wiping sweat from his face. "You ever get tired of people blaming God for everything?" he asked. Elias considered the question. "I get tired of people thinking he owes them explanations." Alex laughed, shaking his head. "You really believe all that? After everything?" Elias nodded once. "Especially after everything." Later that day, the pastor assigned Alex to help restore the very statue he had defaced. The church grounds smelled of cleaning solution and damp stone. The police tape was gone, but streaks of paint still scarred the base. He worked with a wire brush and solvent, his hands raw, eyes watering from the fumes. As he scrubbed near the foot of the cross, he noticed something carved into the stone that hadn't been visible before. "Those who seek shall find." The letters were faint, older than the rest of the monument. He ran his fingers over them, tracing each groove. "Hey, Father," he called. "Did you know this was here?" Elias walked over, squinting. "No," he said softly. "That inscription predates me. Maybe predates the church itself." That night, Alex searched the phrase online, sitting in the dark of his room. The results led to old articles, a few blog posts, and a digital scan of a 19th century journal mentioning a sculptor named Anton Heller who had claimed to see a miracle while carving a crucifix for a small Ohio parish. He had written that he saw light emanate from the stone and heard words he couldn't explain. Alex closed the laptop slowly, uneasy but curious. In the days that followed, small things began to happen. Once, while cleaning the community center, he switched on the radio and froze. The song playing was Emily's favorite, one she had sung endlessly during car rides. He hadn't heard it in years. Another day, walking home, he looked up to see a cross-shaped gap in the clouds, sunlight pouring through in perfect symmetry. He told himself it was coincidence, that the mind finds patterns where it wants them. Yet each time, he felt something tighten behind his ribs. A memory of faith he thought was gone. He didn't tell Elias. He didn't tell anyone. But his nights grew heavier. The dreams came more often now, not just of the statue, but of his sister's face reflected in its expression, of her voice whispering his name through wind and rain. He'd wake up sweating, unable to say what scared him more, the dreams themselves, or the possibility that they weren't dreams at all. Still, each morning he showed up for work. He wiped, scrubbed, painted, and listened to the slow rhythm of Elias's stories, pretending he didn't notice how often the church bells seemed to ring exactly when his thoughts drifted toward her. And one evening, as the sun went down behind the spire and the yard filled with shadows, he looked up at the crucifix again. The stone face was cleaner now, restored almost to its original state, yet the eyes seemed different somehow, softer, deeper, as if they knew something he didn't. The wind picked up, lifting leaves around his feet. For a moment he thought he heard his sister's laughter in the rustle, clear and distant, fading with the light. He stood still, his hand resting on the brush, the smell of solvent sharp in the air. He didn't know yet that the line between guilt and grace had already begun to blur. By early November, the weather in Fairview had turned raw and colorless, that kind of Ohio cold that seeps through jackets and leaves the world quiet. Alex's community service was half done by then, and the churchyard, which had once felt like punishment, had started to feel like the only place he could think without noise. The statue stood clean again, the black paint gone except for faint shadows that no solvent could lift completely. He often caught himself glancing at it while sweeping leaves or repainting benches, feeling a tension he couldn't name, like unfinished business with something that wasn't human. But what began as guilt was about to turn into something that would chase him through the night. The first news came through a post online. Teen injured attempting viral Crucifix prank. The photo was blurry, but the headline was enough. Alex's stomach dropped as he scrolled. A 15-year-old in Indiana had tried to climb a church statue with spray paint and had fallen, fracturing his skull. The boy's family had given a statement. "We forgive the young man who inspired this," the mother said. "God will use all pain for good." Alex read that sentence 3 times, not understanding how anyone could forgive him for something like that. He turned off his phone and sat in silence for an hour, hands shaking. When he went to the churchyard the next day, he found Elias pruning the rose bushes by the fence. The old man's back was bent, his breath visible in the cold air. Alex hesitated, then said, "Did you hear about that kid?" Elias nodded slowly without looking up. "Yes, terrible thing." Alex kicked at the gravel. "They said they forgave me. I don't even know them. How does that make sense?" Elias straightened, leaning on his shears. "Forgiveness isn't a trade, Alex. It's not earned by apology. It's given because otherwise the heart dies under its own weight." Alex frowned, rubbing his hands together. "That sounds nice, but it's not real. People don't just forgive like that." Elias studied him quietly. "Some do, usually the ones who've suffered most." They worked side by side in silence for a long while until Elias said softly, "You never told me about her." Alex didn't have to ask who he meant. "Emily," he said after a moment. "She was 17. We were driving back from the lake. I was supposed to pick her up, but I was late. It rained, the car slid, and—" He stopped, his throat closing. "She prayed all the time. She believed everything, and it still happened. Elias lowered his head, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. "I lost my son in an accident," he said quietly. "He was 22. I wanted to hate God too, but hate kept me in the dark for years. I only started to see light again when I stopped demanding answers and started asking for strength." Alex didn't respond. The words felt heavy, but they didn't sound false. He just nodded once, his eyes burning. That night, a thunderstorm rolled across Fairview. Rain hammered the roof of his house, lightning flashed through his window, and Alex lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The guilt over the boy in Indiana clawed at him, mixed with something deeper, that pull toward the statue, toward whatever he had started there. At midnight, unable to stay still, he put on his jacket and walked into the storm. Water soaked through his shoes, cold and fast, the streetlights blurring behind the sheets of rain. When he reached St. Mark's, the gate was half open, creaking against the wind. He stepped through. The churchyard was silver and trembling under the lightning. The crucifix stood ahead, tall and dark, rain cascading down its arms like veins of light. Alex shouted over the thunder, "You win, all right? You win. What do you want from me?" His voice broke, lost in the wind. Lightning struck a tree nearby with a crack that shook the ground. He flinched but didn't run. "You think this means anything?" he shouted again. "You didn't save her. You didn't save me. You just watched." The rain beat against his face, his hair plastered to his forehead. He took another step closer. "Say something. Anything." The next flash of light froze the yard in white. The paint stains, long thought gone, glistened again, and then, before his eyes, began to fade, dissolving into the surface as if being washed away from within. The stone face grew brighter, the lines of the eyes and mouth softening, the expression changing from agony to something calm and impossibly alive. Alex stumbled backward, his breath catching. The rain slowed around him for a second, or maybe time itself did, and from the base of the statue something small rolled out of the mud, a glint of silver under the lightning. He knelt, trembling, and picked it up. It was a cross necklace, bent at the clasp, its chain knotted and familiar. He wiped the dirt from it and froze. The tiny engraving on the back, faint but clear, read EMW, his sister's initials. He sank to the wet ground, the necklace clutched in his fist. "No," he whispered. "No, that's not possible." The wind howled through the trees like a voice that wasn't wind at all. He stayed there for a long time, rain running down his face, not knowing if he was crying or not. When morning came, the storm had passed. The churchyard was washed clean, the statue pale against a sky so clear it hurt to look at. Alex stood barefoot in the grass, mud on his jeans, his hair stiff with dried rain. He still held the necklace. The engraved letters caught the sun like a spark, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel the need to move or speak or fight. He just stared at the statue, unable to look away, his pulse steady in the silence. But what he had seen that night, the light, the washing rain, the impossible necklace, would not stay contained. Others had seen it too, and soon the story of that storm would begin to spread beyond Fairview, twisting through disbelief and wonder until it reached him again, reshaped as something holy. The morning after the storm came bright and windless, the kind of clear light that makes the air itself seem new. Dew covered the grass of St. Mark's churchyard, every blade glinting with sun. Alex stood there for a long time, hands in his pockets, the silver cross resting against his palm. It had been real. He knew that now. The storm, the light, the statue washing clean before his eyes. He could still feel the warmth of it on his skin, though the rain had been ice cold. When he finally walked toward the church, the door was already open, and inside the faint scent of candles and damp wood filled the air. Elias was waiting near the altar, kneeling in silence. The old man turned his head as Alex entered, but didn't speak. Alex walked slowly down the aisle, his shoes squeaking softly on the floorboards, and stopped a few feet away. He opened his hand and showed the cross. "It was hers," he said quietly. Elias nodded once, no surprise in his eyes, as if he had been expecting this moment. Alex sat in the front pew, staring up at the stained glass window that caught the morning light and threw small rainbows across the wall. For a while, neither of them said anything. Then Alex whispered, "I think I saw something last night. Not in my head, real. It felt like someone heard me." Elias stood and walked over, resting a hand gently on Alex's shoulder. "You don't have to explain it," he said. "Some things are not given to the mind to measure. They are meant only to be witnessed." His hand was warm, steady. "What you saw may have been a miracle, or maybe it was love, showing itself the only way you would see." They stayed there in the quiet, the clock above the doorway ticking softly. Sunlight poured through the window, landing on the crucifix at the front of the church. The figure of Christ looked clean again, no paint, no scars, the face peaceful and still. Alex could have sworn the features were gentler than before. Later that day, as he helped Elias deliver boxes of food to the shelter, people in town stopped him on the street. Some asked questions, others just nodded, unsure what to say. A few claimed they had seen the light during the storm, a glow spreading through the clouds above the church. Alex didn't argue. He only said, maybe it was a reminder. By evening, his phone was full of messages from people he hadn't spoken to in months. Apologies, questions, prayers. The same picture that had once made him infamous was now being shared again, but this time with words like restored and forgiven. Weeks passed. He finished his service hours, but he kept coming back to help at the church, quietly, without being asked. The act of work, cleaning, repairing, carrying, brought a peace he hadn't known in years. One afternoon, he drove out to the cemetery on the edge of town. The ground was soft from melting frost, and the sky above was pale and cloudless. He knelt by Emily's grave, brushed away a few dry leaves, and set the cross against the headstone. "I found it," he said softly. "I don't know how, but I did." The wind lifted faintly through the trees. He smiled a little, the first real one in a long time, and sat there until the sun began to fall. When he returned home that evening, his parents were in the kitchen. His mother looked up from the sink, hesitated, and then simply opened her arms. For the first time since the accident, he let himself be held. His father put a hand on his shoulder, saying nothing, and that silence was enough. In that simple closeness, the years of blame and distance dissolved like paint washed away by rain. And as winter came, Alex kept working at the church, repainting a weathered wall near the courtyard. The brush moved slowly in his hand, the same hand that had once defaced the cross. The sun sat low on the horizon, orange and quiet. He didn't think about what people said anymore, about miracles or punishments or second chances. He only thought about the sound of bristles against stone, about the feel of air moving warm against his face, about how sometimes forgiveness arrives not with thunder, but with stillness. In time, he began speaking at small youth meetings, not as a preacher, but as someone who understood how anger could bury a heart. He told them about losing Emily, about how his disbelief had been its own prison. He didn't try to explain what had happened that night at the church. He just said that somewhere between guilt and mercy, something greater had reached for him, and he had finally stopped running. He never claimed to see visions again. He didn't need to. He saw God now in the ordinary, in laughter during cleanup days, in the way Elias's hands trembled slightly when tying bags, in the light that bent through the stained glass and painted everything gold for a moment before fading away. And maybe that was the point all along, that the divine doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits quietly in the ruins we've made until we finally look up. He often thought of that drop of paint on the statue's cheek, how it had slid like a tear. He realized later it wasn't the statue crying, it was him, seeing his own grief reflected back until he could finally forgive himself. Forgiveness, he had learned, is not forgetting. It is remembering without the need to hate. Let us pray for those who still seek light in their darkest moments, for those who have hurt others out of pain, and for those who believe their hearts are too far gone to be healed. Let us pray for the people who are lost between disbelief and hope, that they may find a hand reaching toward them in quiet ways. May the storms they walk through wash away the markings of guilt and leave only the strength to begin again. Let the faces they once defaced become the mirrors that show them mercy. May every heart that trembles in shame learn that love can still return like morning light. And may every act of forgiveness, given or received, open the world a little wider for peace to enter. Amen. For those who have listened to this story, take a moment before you go. Let it stay with you a little. If you feel it in your heart, write the simple words, "Jesus is still with us," in the comments below. I will read every one of them to know how many of us still believe. Sometimes that small act says more than any sermon ever could. Share this story with someone who might need reminding that mercy still waits in quiet places. And if you wish to hear more stories like this one, subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching. God bless you. And may the peace you felt here tonight follow you into tomorrow, steady and unspoken, like the light that stays after a storm has passed.